So I'm going to talk about design systems and creativity. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is I think there's been a lot of, I guess a little bit of negativity towards how design systems supposedly inhibits creativity, and I'm here to say that's actually not the case. So I am Jina on Twitter and GitHub and almost all the things, so if you want to shout at me or like, post any pictures, tag me in it so I can find it later, that would be awesome. Yeah, so I recently left my job at Amazon. I was running the design systems and design ops for a new product. Unfortunately, I can't tell you anything about it because I'm still under NDA and the product's not launched yet. So unfortunately, I won't have any tidbits for you on Amazon. I will be talking a lot about my prior job, not a lot, but a little bit. So I worked at Salesforce. I was the lead designer on the Lightning design system. Hopefully you've seen it. Almost a decade ago, I was doing design systems work at Apple, where I was working on the Apple online store. Doesn't actually exist anymore because it's been rolled into the marketing site, but that was like one of my other larger projects. I did want to mention I'm a core team member of SAS, and in case you thought the SAS community was dying, that is not true. Natalie is working full-time now on SAS. Google has her doing that, and there's a lot of active work being done and a lot of new features that are going to be coming out, so definitely watch for that. And I'm working on some updates to the website as well. So, okay, enough about that. So I wanted to have everybody imagine that you are interviewing for a job at Apple. They've asked you to design what would be the perfect stove if Apple were to design a stove. So you might start to think about, okay, so it's probably going to have a touch interface, obviously not near the burners. Maybe I can even listen to music. Maybe, Apple doesn't like knobs and buttons and things, so maybe it's just very smooth and sleek. It has like an induction surface, so it's all smooth. And you kind of like design something that you think is really beautiful. And then they throw another thing at you, which is, okay, so here's all the constraints that you have. You have to follow these guidelines. You have to follow these, use these materials, and it needs to be accessible to a person that is in a wheelchair. How would you change up your design? And so now you realize, oh, okay, now I have new rules that I didn't have before. How would you do that? So this was actually an interview question that I was asked when I interviewed at Apple. And it really kind of got me startled a little bit because I was like, oh, I didn't really think about it in that way. But what I would ask of you is, let's say you've been given this problem. Would you consider yourself still being creative as you are given these constraints and these guidelines and these materials that you are required to use? Would you? I absolutely would, but for some reason people think design systems inhibit your creativity, and it's essentially the same thing. I'm sure many of us remember the CSS Zen Garden. If you don't, it was basically like, back when it first came out, it really inspired people to understand like all the things that you could do with CSS, and you could break out of doing like the standard like table-based layouts and do like really interesting designs with the same markup. You could change all sorts of things just powered through CSS. This was really awesome for me. I actually used this a lot when I was interviewing with clients and agencies that were still trying to understand the value of web standards. I used this as my example. A little bit after that whole phase, there was the whole is blah killing web design. I was actually on a panel at South by Southwest where they wanted us to discuss whether WordPress was killing web design. I remember, and basically there was consensus with, no, obviously it's not. So it's not really a good panel when you have everybody agreeing with each other. And then, with the app-based design brought by like iPhone and Android and all that, some people felt locked into the guidelines and patterns, but I wouldn't consider that killing web design. You're being pretty creative still. There was also a lot of talk about designing in the browser. Like, I love designing in the browser. Who designs in the browser? Cool. So then why, okay, so you're still being creative. You're still like creating these things, even if you have these like set tools. With the rise of design systems, style guides, pattern libraries, CSS frameworks, whatever you want to call these things, there's like this idea for some reason that they inhibit creativity. And as I said, they absolutely do not. And I hope that this talk will convince you, in case you're one of those people that think this. As we all know, design systems have been around for ages and used to have nothing to do with code, nothing to do with React, nothing to do with any of this. Like, design systems are essentially just thinking through your design as a system. A lot of people try to put new definitions on it, and some of those definitions hold true to today's context of design systems, but really at the end of the day, a design system is just thinking through your design in a systemic way. I like quotes, so I'm going to have a lot of quotes. One of my favorite quotes that I saw in an article that Yesenia Perez-Cruz wrote, she said, "A beautiful design system is about finding the same balance of consistency and variety. Too systemic, and the design becomes predictable and repetitive. Too much variation, and the system is confusing and overwhelming." So let's just think about that for a minute. It sounds like it's all about balance, right? I would like to just stop for a moment and let's talk about what it means to be creative. So for some people, when they think of creative, they think about aesthetics, how things look. For some other people, it's more about how you solve a problem. And so I think there's a little bit of friction there on what exactly it means to be creative. Is it about solving problems, or is it about the aesthetics? And let's talk about aesthetics for a minute. Amelie Lamont is one of the favorite people I love to follow on Twitter, and she has these amazing threads that she writes about all sorts of things around design and inclusion and so on. And she started a thread where she asked, what if there were a school teaching design decentered from the, I'm actually not sure how to pronounce that, hegemonic design gaze, plus centered, unheard voices, ideas, and cultures. And so she kind of made a little mock-up of what that kind of school would look like. She goes on to say, many of the formative ideas of the, shortened to HDG, the hegemonic design gaze, stem from very Eurocentric ideas of design. Have you ever noticed that when you open a design textbook, all of the design greats, historical or modern, come from Western and white cultures? And I highly encourage you to read the whole thread. It goes on. The slides will get shared later, so you can get the exact link. But I think this is a really interesting conversation when it comes with design systems. I saw a couple days later, Isha Kaslawal, who used to actually work with me on the Salesforce Lightning design system, and now she does design systems for Twitch. And she said, I love traveling to Asian countries because it's such a good reminder that minimalism, symmetry, black, white, and design is not all that matters. There's so much aesthetic beauty in loud colors and patterns, and visual balance doesn't only come from evenness. And I loved Chrissy Tillman's response, where she's like, yes, the design industry is myopic as fuck. And then Isha followed it up with, the fact that every young designer is taught that Eurocentric design is the best needs to change ASAP. This really struck a chord with me as I was thinking about design systems and creativity. I do think a lot of people that went to school for design or just learned it on their own do kind of follow the typical minimal, Eurocentric standards. And so that is why when you look at a lot of design systems, they're usually, dark text on a white background. They usually have very similar types of aesthetics. And so for most people, I could see why they might think, okay, all these design systems look alike. But you don't have to really follow like what everybody is doing. And so it's just something I kind of want you to think about. Obviously, you would follow whatever your brand aesthetic is, but if you're one of those people that get to establish what that new brand is, maybe don't follow those aesthetics. Maybe try something a little different. So Jennifer Hom is one of the, probably one of my most favorite people to follow right now in terms of like illustration. I saw her give a talk during SF Design Week, and what was interesting is even though she was talking about illustration, I found that she had the most systems-focused talk out of any of the talks that I saw that week. She actually recently got featured by Wired about how she is bringing an inclusive aesthetic to Airbnb. So, people are a very common theme that you're seeing. Like, this is a very trendy thing a lot of companies are doing right now, is like the people and this illustrative style. But what she was concerned about was how do we actually show this in a way where people feel truly connected to it? And they looked at doing like blue people and purple people and all this stuff. But she wrote, I looked at it not from an aesthetic perspective, but what is the company trying to do? How is it moving into the future? And so what was really cool about this was she showed how they were doing illustrations of people that modeled after actual real life people. Some of them were celebrities, but were obscured a little bit so you didn't quite know who they were, or just like civil rights people, like all these different people that they wanted to represent. And they had people in wheelchairs, they had people with burqas, they had like all these different cultural changes, as well as changes or differences in ability and so on. However, when they needed to bring a marketing site, let's say to China, China has a very different way of handling inclusion than America would, or even in the UK, because it's not just about like how the people look, but even just like what they were wearing. And so they actually changed, almost like localizing text for, if you're like bringing something to market in some other country with another language, they actually changed up their illustration aesthetic as well to focus on like that locale. And I thought that was really cool. So I did want to mention a little bit about a process that we used at Salesforce when I was working on the Lightning design system that I think is useful not only just for design systems, but also product design, and also thinking through how to make creative decisions if you're thinking about it in terms of like, how do you solve problems? And that is design principles. If you remember my workshop yesterday, then you already kind of got the gist of this, but you'll get to get it again. But our design principles were not just the bullet point things that we wanted to add on our site to show, hey, we think about design in this way, but these were actually an actionable tool for us. And so our first principle, which it's a coincidence that it's named after, or has the same name as my conference, totally unrelated, but the first principle was clarity, which is to eliminate ambiguity, enable people to see, understand, and act with confidence. And the second is efficiency, streamline and optimize workflows, intelligently anticipate needs to help people work better, smarter, and faster. Consistency, create familiarity and strengthen intuition by applying the same solution to the same problem. And finally, beauty, demonstrate respect for people's time and attention through thoughtful and elegant craftsmanship. And these were given to you in an exact order for a reason. First of all, I do want to mention these illustrations were done by the intern we had on our team, the design systems team. He got hired shortly after that, and we used these illustrations on posters and postcards and hung it up everywhere to remind people of what our principles were. But we actually used them as a tool. So the order I gave them to you was the order in which they were important to us. And so we actually used this to drive our discussions, our decision-making. If we were having debates, like, hey, we can't do that here because then it won't be consistent, which is the third principle. But maybe you could argue, yes, but it actually will make things more efficient for the user or provide better clarity. And in that case, that decision would actually win over consistency. So it's important to figure out what those principles are for you and then use them to drive your decisions. I will tell you that failed design systems, from my experience, are due to a lack of a unified vision, shared language, and purpose. I was reading this post by Geraldine Jern-Poon-Phillips, who was doing design systems where actually collaborating with clients. And I thought this was really interesting. She said, through sketching with clients, we use their expertise to generate a deeper understanding and more informed visual designs. In these sessions, people tend to tell stories as they draw or talk out loud about ideas they have but can't really articulate yet. We work off each other's ideas to come up with solutions together. And I just thought that was so cool because it's like, instead of just coming with like, here's the standard solutions that always work for everyone, you work with the client and actually like come up with these solutions together. And I thought it was interesting using the phrase like telling stories because I really think that's like an important part of really truly doing a creative process. Another thing to note, and I think this is something probably maybe the most important point, but when you're creating a design system, obviously not everything has to be in the system, but conversely, not everything has to be from the system. So just because you have a design system doesn't mean that you are stuck with only those things, and it doesn't mean that you're limited to those things. You can put things together with brand new creative things. I love watching the talks by Mina Markham, where they have their standard typography and they have their standard visual elements, but they do these really creative, interesting layouts with CSS Grid and all sorts of things. And you basically just kind of like put these things together and you can really create something beautiful. Claudina Sarai said in one of her talks that patterns are not dogma, they can change and adapt. So just because you have a system also means you're not like stuck with that system forever. I really truly believe a good design system is built to evolve and change. I think there's a lot of discussion around UI kits and around design tools right now. And I personally don't really love making these UI kits because I see them as disposable assets. But I can see why some people want the need to feel like things look and feel and are beautiful, which is why I'm really excited about some of the new design tools that are coming out right now. One of them is Modules, which has a Kickstarter, and basically you're designing with actual code and you can see very quickly all the responsive screen sizes. So it's a nice way to blend the creative and the engineering together like really quickly. Shout out to Interplay. They're doing it. Yeah. Also an amazing tool coming soon. Is soon the right word to say, or is it out? I'm not sure. Okay. But similar concept, really great way of like combining the creative aspect with engineering. I've been working on my new website and I'm trying to learn CSS Grid, so I've been using the new Grid tool in Webflow, and this tool is really cool. You have to play with it. But it's just really cool because it's like not only am I designing the layout that I want and it's writing the code, but I use that as a way for me to actually learn like the inner workings of how CSS Grid was doing it. And it actually, I've seen presentations on CSS Grid, but it was this tool that actually helped me kind of really figure out how CSS Grid works. I also really love when people that do design systems do little side projects that are related to their design system. So I'm almost done. So this was a thing that the US design, Web Design Standards, now called the US, I think it's like design system now. They were doing these Valentine's Day cards just for fun for their customers and people. And so it's like accordion to me, you're the best. Roses are this hex value, violets are this hex value. I accidentally won a contest I didn't know I was entering with Microsoft's design system, and they sent me all this really sweet swag. And we did a lot of awesome, fun swag as well at Salesforce when we were working on things for like upcoming Dreamforces. So just a final couple notes that I want to leave with. I saw this fantastic talk at Design Ops Summit a couple years ago with Jim Kalbeck, and he came up with these people on stage, and they just started playing jazz. And it was really, really good jazz, and I was kind of like, oh, that's an interesting way to open up a talk. And then he starts talking about how they had never practiced together. They had never performed together, but it worked. And it turns out the reason for that was that jazz is actually a pattern library. Jazz is a set of patterns, and once you understand those patterns, then you can get on stage and you can just start playing together and be very experimental, and then you have these moments where you mix in, just whatever, if you want to just like go kind of wild with your instrument. And I thought that was so cool. And the last thing I want to mention is to remember the end goal of design systems, which design systems, I know there's like things around tools and automation and all that, but they are about people. They're about who you're serving, whether it's your users or whether it's like even just your coworkers that you're trying to help. Just always remember that it's about people. So some quick final resources. StyleGuides.io, great resource, has all sorts of stuff about design systems. Sarah mentioned the Design Systems Handbook that I co-wrote for Envision. It's free online. I organize ClarityConf. If you want to go, use DSLConf as a discount code, and you will get 10% off. And also, there will be another Patterns Day coming up, which is the last Friday in June. Jeremy said I was allowed to break that news. So that's in Brighton, which is really close to you. And in Helsinki, Design Systems Conference is going to announce their stuff too. So I'm so excited to see all these design systems conferences. Join the Slack if you haven't already. There's a channel in there for this conference. I'm going to go quickly through this because I'm over time, but Medium publication, it's like publication.designsystems, news.designsystems, that's run by Stu, jobs.designsystems, which sadly has no jobs right now, so please post a job. And then finally, you can follow me as Jina on almost everything. You can email me at Jina@designsystems, and if you want to support my work, I'm on Patreon as well. Thanks.